Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the perfect scary movie. I'm Richard O'Brien, purveyor of nightmares. Prepare yourselves for 2 hours of sheer terror as we discover the shocking power of ghosts, werewolves, aliens, psycho killers, and Satan himself. But don't be afraid, for I shall be here with you to guide you through this perilous journey. And so, without further...
Despite the obvious risks, this broadcast will continue, as tonight we bring you the most terrifying scenes ever concocted by the evil geniuses who toil to create the perfect scary movie.
Everybody went, ah! You know, we were so...
People were passing out, people were throwing up, people couldn't stand it.
Oh my God, what the fuck is that? And it scared the country. It scared the world.
I couldn't take it. I have to. I left the theater.
It's scary and fascinating at the same time.
I'm scared to close my eyes.
But viewer, you need fear no more, as tonight we will take you by your trembling hands. Psychological ploys that those behind the scary movie have used to make billions of films coil in horror.
You want to scare the living shit? Nail the audience to the back of the theater.
And if the guy pisses his pants, then I know I still got what it takes.
So what is the secret to crafting our big screen nightmares? Over the next 2 hours, reveal the evil genius's secret formula for creating the perfect scary movie.
Scary makers developed this set of rules, and if they were adhered to, you were guaranteed to scare the pants off your audience.
But as we have already tragically witnessed, these rules have always been fiercely protected by the guardians of the scary movie.
Cannot tell you any secrets. Cannot do it.
However, we can, and throughout the course of tonight's broadcast, we will reveal all. But first, let's start with the 5 basic rules of the perfect scary movie.
He's alive!
If you want to make a scary movie, a real gory horror show, there's certain rules, you know, that you're obligated to follow. Rule number 1, you gotta make them jump.
Those moments are usually done without any anticipation. It's something very ordinary happening, and then completely out of the blue.
Ah! Boom! You know, that's what it is. It's you're startled. It's like you're not prepared for that.
The switch from one sequence to another, the sudden appearance of something that's unexpected, is just the kind of thing that's going to trigger your innate startle responses.
It certainly livens you up, and you feel most alive when you're afraid.
Next up, instill your heroes with unthinking curiosity.
Curiosity killed the cat is a brilliant rule. I mean, who in their right mind is going to go look to see where that screechy noise is coming from?
Oh, what was that blood-curdling scream? I don't know. Why don't we go and have a check?
Immediately, you're starting to get anxious. Don't go up to the old house in the middle of nowhere and knock on the damn door.
Don't go in that house. Don't go in that house. Don't go in that house. Don't go in that house.
Do they deserve it? I mean, yeah, they deserve it. I mean, what are you thinking?
Now the audience is on the ropes, pound their nerves with scary music.
The ultimate score for me for a horror film is Psycho, because all you have to hear is that, and you immediately think of this. It was terrifying.
You can put scary music to anything, and it'll scare you. Well, see what I mean. Of course, kittens scare me anyways.
Don't allow a glimmer of hope. Pleasure will be punished as sex equals death.
Anybody who has any kind of sexual relations in a movie, in a horror film, whether it's with people or flora, fauna, is definitely going to bite it in the end.
Go get me a beer.
Obviously, you have sex, you must die.
Hello?
And finally, allow the viewer no respite, as the monster will never die.
It seems like the monster has more lives than a cat. I know Freddy does. No matter how creative they are, the monster will live again. It'll take an electrical charge, someone will dig him up, hopefully not mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but the monster will always be back. You can count on it.
Freddy's coming for you.
So tonight, for the very first time, we will reveal how the fiendish, scary movie has deployed these rules in a blitzkrieg of cinematic terror. We will decode the psycho killers.
You walk out of the theater saying to yourself, there are people like that.
Dissect the satanic chillers.
Oh no! Oh Jesus Christ!
And rip open the sci-fi thrillers.
Horror movies are all based on fear, and one of the things that everybody fears is the future, because they don't know it. They don't know what it is.
But our journey begins with that horror staple, the movie monster. This legion of the undead have always haunted our imaginations and embodied our most primal of fears.
Do you know what really annoys me about vampire movies, though? Like, some woman is always being bitten by a vampire, and like, obviously she's gonna become a vampire, but she doesn't even know she's been bitten. I mean, how could you not know you've been bitten by a vampire? Utterly ridiculous. It would never, ever happen.
Welcome back, brave viewer. Prepare yourself as you are about to come face to face with the world's most famous vampire. The zombie child who shocked the nation. And an army of killing machines returning from the grave. Together they make up the army of the undead, the original movie monsters. Creatures of the night have always plagued the human imagination, dating back before science, before religion, and even before the written word.
In the pre-modern era in particular, we have this great inability to understand the natural world out there, and in order to try and make sense of it, the invention of demons, of ghosts, of anything that is dark and scary, and particularly things from the other world.
The evil is out there in the dark. You know, it's creeping through the woods, it's turning into a werewolf. It's the other.
With the birth of cinema, our ancient nightmares could finally be played out before our very eyes, and the creation of the big screen monster would herald a new era of fear.
Monsters embody many kinds of fears, and since our fears change from generation to generation, so do our monsters.
Transylvanian terror.
The evolution of the big screen monster can be traced back to a silent German film, Nosferatu, made in 1922. Filled with dark and sinister imagery, Nosferatu would become the template for the modern scary movie.
You know, there's certain films that absolutely, the images of which stick with you very strongly, and Nosferatu is one of those films. You have the image of a very angular man, of the rats, of the shadows, and it seems to be the classic image of the horror movie.
Nosferatu would give birth to a movie monster that would strike deep at the most primal of fears. The vampire.
What we see in Nosferatu is a very scary character indeed, who is almost human, but not quite, who has, in fact, a lot of animal characteristics. He has claws and he has teeth, and that's tapping into something very primeval in us, the mixture of human and animal. That's still scary.
He looks as though he spreads disease, he's going to penetrate people. All of those kinds of images are the kinds of things which will elicit disgust.
And this young traveller would provide the perfect prey for the hideous, blood-sucking vampire. Cut off from safe surroundings and placed in overwhelming danger, the traveller's plight would give the scary movie its first and most important rule: isolate the victim.
This is very similar, obviously, to being trapped. It means that you can't use your primary innate response, which would be to flee. So you experience the fear with them even more.
The images of this disease-ridden spectre infecting the innocent preyed deep on the fragile psyche of post-war Europe. Since the early 1920s, the continent had been in the grip of a savage influenza epidemic.
In Germany, 400,000 men died of this epidemic in just that 1 year. All over the world, we're talking about 70 million people. You know, this is many, many more people than died during the entire First World War. So those great scenes that we see in the film of coffins just parading down the streets, people watching this film must have been thinking about what was happening just a few years earlier.
Whilst terrifying post-war Europe, the spectre of Nosferatu would be sent to an early grave by a technology developing across the Atlantic that would transform the vampire into a worldwide movie icon. In the early 30s, the talkie brought sound to Hollywood, changing the film industry forever. And in 1931, the power of the scary movie was finally realized, as Universal's Dracula became a massive worldwide smash. It would redefine the movie monster and in the process change the course of the scary movie.
I am Dracula.
We needed Dracula to come down those stairs and say,
"Listen to them, children of the night. What music they make."
It's that plus the image of the Count that makes such an indelible impression on our minds.
The iconic portrayal of Dracula was down to Hungarian actor Bela Lugosi. Unlike the rat-like vampire of Nosferatu, Lugosi's Dracula was deceptively appealing, yet riddled with unseen menace and malicious intent.
Lugosi has a strange kind of appeal. He's seductive in a way that we can't quite understand. And this is deeply unsettling.
To die, to be really dead, that must be glorious.
He had an elegance and also a certain sexuality, I think, that was really rather appealing.
And it was precisely this notion of a demonic sexual predator that would truly terrify the Christian morality of 1930s America. For Dracula, the themes of sex and death remain forever entwined.
All those fears of sexual predators and, you know, being penetrated and all that kind of stuff, it's you know, and it comes back to the most fundamental thing, which is our blood, you know, the plasma within us.
Things like syphilis and things like that at the time were, you know, running riot. So the idea of sharing blood and penetration turning into you changing physically and physical disease, you know, that's what the whole vampire myth's all about, really.
It's all in there with Dracula. You can't go wrong with a bit of Drac.
Indeed. I heard that sometimes women would faint.
And the obvious potential of this new type of movie was not lost on Universal. With the vampire successfully raised from the grave, there was simply only one way to go.
They went straight ahead and started making others.
Universal made a slew of monster movies, cashing in on the success of Dracula. First stop was the werewolf, an ancient being with a fondness for the Welsh valleys.
Wales probably had more werewolves than anyone else. You're laughing, it's absolutely true, look that up.
Next up was ancient Egypt, where Universal would excavate the tombs of the mummies, with mixed effect.
They got these guys in their linen suits. Stop, mummy! And his only defense is that the bullets go right through him. No, but they could outwalk him.
It's the mummy! Walk away! Walk away!
However, Universal's monster movies would prove too macabre for the stuffy British censors, who were convinced such films would deprave and corrupt the good citizens of Britain.
And so they were banned. There's no two ways about it, and we didn't see them in this country for a very long time.
The disturbing power of the American monster movie had proved its undoing in the UK, and although the ban would eventually be lifted, Britain would have to wait until the 1950s for our own homegrown version of the monster movie.
The horror of Hammer.
In the late 50s, the British scary movie came of age, thanks to Hammer Studios. They would create a new breed of horror thanks once again to a major technological breakthrough.
Hammer had one thing that Universal didn't, and that was color.
They took full advantage of it. Buckets of blood flowed across the screen. They gloried in it, and the audiences reacted.
Blood from the mummy's tomb was typical of Hammer's gratuitous application of blood on anything that moved. Never before seen in glorious Technicolor or in such vast quantities, it was guaranteed to raise a scream.
They were the pictures that introduced the explicitness that now is common.
It was a challenge to young British kids. Can you withstand the shock? People couldn't resist.
Hammer's new formula was a huge hit, and so they went horror crazy, constantly revamping the vampire with more blood than anyone ever deemed possible. But the blood was beginning to run thin.
Dracula had risen from the grave, he'd risen from the subway, he'd risen a lot. And I think they were kind of maybe running out of audience too. I think that they had to come up with something a little fresh.
And the result was The Vampire Lovers, which was the standard Hammer vampire picture with tits and lesbians and gore and you name it.
And playing the lead role was none other than 60s screen siren Ingrid Pitt.
My dearest Laura.
Here she tenderly embraces a potential victim and gives the audience a sense of the high-concept plotline.
All characters are bitten on the breast. I don't know why, but that's why they do it, although I myself do it on the neck.
This was thinking man's horror with a capital H. When a concerned doctor examines one of Ingrid's victims, the true horror of their unorthodox adversary is revealed in terrifying close-up.
What I love is from that moment on, anytime the vampire gets to anybody, it's like, oh, I've been bitten, look! And out comes a breast. It's Dracula or a titmouse. I'm not sure which.
Emma, hand me that towel over there, please.
Yes.
But the horror soon gave way to sex and full frontal nudity. And the producer's job of getting Ingrid to disrobe in the name of high art took months of tense negotiation.
Jimmy said to me, you have to take your clothes off. I said, yes, please.
Unlike Dracula, this wasn't sex and death, it was just sex. Whilst glossy, beautifully filmed, and almost always in focus, the monster movie had lost its way, and this blatant titillation would signal the end of Hammer along with the old-school movie monster. Fangs for the memories.
This wasn't working, and we wondered where the horror film was going.
The monster movie would find its new home in the social chaos of late 1960s America. Here, real-life terror far outshone strange goings-on in Transylvania.
Late 1960s America is a time of great trauma and great turmoil. You have students protesting in the streets and being shot at. You have Nixon and all of that corruption and scandal. Most importantly, the civil rights movement. Somehow things are going a bit wild. They don't know quite what to do about it. Night of the Living Dead encapsulates those fears absolutely perfectly.
Zombie Nation.
In 1968, independent filmmaker George Romero would unleash Night of the Living Dead, a chilling tale of a nation under siege by an army of undead killing machines.
Night of the Living Dead really started the modern zombie. There is no other modern movie monster like the zombie, and Romero created all of that.
What was so frightening to me was the relentlessness, the unthinking relentlessness, and the fact that their sole goal was death to the living. Here we have this little group of people caught in a home. Each one is uniquely different, trying his best to survive.
Confused by what appears to be a society rampaging out of control, our band of survivors clutch desperately to the scant information filtering through the airwaves.
It's on, it's on. There's no sound.
The fact that the TV was coming in and out and the radio was coming in and out, the audience learned as much information as the character learned.
And as recent events have shown, that when catastrophes happen, you don't find out all the details immediately.
Romero is able to put you in that house with those characters, where nobody knows what the hell's going on, it's completely chaotic, and every bit of information that they're getting out of the television, you're starving for that.
A widespread investigation of reports from funeral homes, morgues, and hospitals has concluded that the unburied dead are coming back to life and seeking human victims.
When they know they're surrounded by zombies, they've heard that the dead are returning to life, and it's the empathy you get with them thinking, geez, you know, how would I react if I knew that the world was coming to an end?
And as the zombie hordes begin to slaughter the survivors, American audiences would witness the most taboo-breaking murder ever to hit their screens, when a zombie child eats her father and then butchers her own mother.
Oh, baby. That soul is connected to yours because you're family. When you see that the soul doesn't care, kills you anyway, there couldn't be anything more horrific, I think, than that.
And with dawn would come the film's final brutal twist. The lone survivor, the black male lead, is pointlessly gunned down by the American National Guard.
All right, Vince, hit him in the head, right between the eyes.
At that time of civil unrest in the United States, having that kind of like racial tension going on as well was a very sort of, you know, explosive sort of subject matter, really.
To have him die, and then to have him be so brutally handled at the very end with the meat hooks, led to the extreme horror of the film.
By the early 1980s, the zombie had become a familiar staple of monster movies. And so to continue to scare, they were becoming increasingly gory and violent. Evil Dead delivered both by the bucket load.
First Evil Dead was like balls out, no holds barred, penciled in the Achilles tendon, heads lopped off, spewing blood.
So inevitably, Evil Dead suffered public vilification and worldwide bans. The scary movie was about to cross the line.
Evil Dead was probably the scariest experience I'd ever had watching a movie.
There are some certain scenes in that movie that stay with you forever.
7 of hearts, you're right. Hey, Ash, I guessed the card right.
Yeah, truly amazing, Linda.
Evil Dead followed the familiar premise of the modern monster movie. 5 teenagers stuck in an isolated log cabin where, one by one, they would turn into blood-crazed psychopathic zombies. However, the ferocity of this film truly set it apart from its peers.
8 of spades, two spades, jack of diamonds, jack of clubs.
All sorts of hell breaks loose. People die in terrible, terrible ways. People hack up their own girlfriends.
But hacking up girlfriends was just the beginning of Evil Dead's orgy of comic book violence.
It's a challenge to kill people in different ways in horror films, definitely.
But Evil Dead would meet the challenge in spectacular fashion, upping the ante on the Night of the Living Dead trowel murder and going for the garden tool granddaddy, the spade.
It's like the best episode of Scooby-Doo ever made. It really is like an episode of Scooby-Doo, but with gore and shocks and tree rape.
Yes, tree rape. Evil Dead's barrage of violence would cross the line in suitably bizarre fashion, as Cheryl gets raped by a tree possessed of evil spirits.
I was so mortified when I first saw the film and saw that scene. I just wanted to crawl away.
It's just basically looking at abuse and not really exploring anything much more than that.
But amazingly, more controversial than sexual abuse by an out-of-control conifer was this scene involving an HB pencil, a bottle of ketchup, and a rubber leg.
This was boom, yeah, this is working it around.
I feel that to this day. Every time I think of that, I go.
Incredibly, on its release to video, this colourful selection box of sadistic torture, mutilation and death was deemed hugely offensive by the British press. And never one to make a scene, the British censor agreed.
It's so good-natured, that film. That's what's so weird about it being held up as this kind of dreadful text.
There's such an overlaying comedy on that nobody recognizes.
Protesting against the ban, London studio Palace Pictures and director Sam Raimi went before the British courts.
He had practiced this whole speech, and the judge was like, I don't need to hear from you. Anyway, onward with the case. And they won, Palace Pictures won, and of course that just sold all the more video units, because they went, what is this video nasty? I've got to see this video nasty.
Evil Dead became the biggest-selling video in Britain of 1983, as bloodthirsty Brits revelled in scenes that Hammer could only have dreamt of.
Can you ever have too much blood in a horror film? Well, apparently not.
You say there can't be any more blood in this movie, and then they get it again.
It's a gory movie.
Coming up, we time travel into the futuristic world of science fiction and uncover the secrets of this terrifying genre of the scary movie.
In Alien, the guy is just sitting down, having his lunch. Next thing you know. Which is what makes it quite scary, I think. Actually, can we stop a minute? I'm not feeling very well. No, I'm not. I'm not feeling all right at all. I'm good.
Welcome back, dear viewer. Prepare to come face to face with the original mad scientist.
It's alive!
Witness a man turn into an insect. And encounter terrifying alien life forms. All of these horrors make up the spine-chilling world of science fiction. The overriding force of the 20th century was the unstoppable march of science. Darwin's theories of evolution had finally gained popular acceptance. We split the atom and conquered the moon. Yet the more we uncovered, the more reasons we had to fear.
The sci-fi movie gave us a whole new galaxy of things to worry about. You had the mad scientists making evil out of jars. You had aliens coming in from other planets to, like, eradicate the whole world. We had a whole load of new things to be completely petrified over.
It's basically fear of technology. It's fear of the future. It's fear of science.
And science fiction's reign of fear would begin with megalomaniac scientists recklessly meddling with the sacred essence of life itself.
Scientists dabbling with God's creation? Only bad can happen out of this.
Mad science.
Released the same year as Dracula, Universal's Frankenstein was a terrifying parable of the mad scientist out of control. Blasphemous, macabre, and truly shocking, Frankenstein would begin science fiction's march of fear.
He's just resting, waiting for a new life to come.
The word Frankenstein is the mad doctor, it's the mad scientist. It's the concept of science and knowledge as evil.
Think of it, the brain of a dead man, waiting to live again in a body I made with my own hands. With my own hands.
You have Dr. Frankenstein actually forgetting his humanity, believing in a sense that he is someone who can take up the role of God, usurp the deity. And this is what makes it profoundly disturbing for people then.
I mean, he brought dead tissue back to life, which is seen as fucking God.
1930s cinema audiences had never come under such a barrage of blasphemy before, and to compound the shock, Dr. Frankenstein would utter a line even more unthinkable than the imagery.
It's alive! In the name of God! Now I know what it feels like to be God!
Now I know what it feels like to be God. That was too on the nose and too blasphemous at that time, so I think they looped another line.
And the creation itself would strike fear into 1930s America. The polar opposite of the supernatural Dracula, Frankenstein's monster would represent the walking embodiment of all of science's ills.
What we have there, in essence, is a kind of a combination of a robot and an ape, something fallen from grace. You know, a technological Superman somehow going down the Darwinian tubes.
The villagers are all scared of what they don't know, so they, they torture him and they try and kill him.
The whole point of that movie is there are things man are not meant to know. And you are not supposed to fool around with this stuff.
Unfortunately, no one was listening, and the mad scientist would become a staple of the sci-fi scary movie. And come the 1970s, surprise, surprise, his main obsession was sex.
The 70s was the great period of sexual fears. It was no longer the fears of syphilis. It was much more the fears of promiscuity generally.
Shivers would prey on these new anxieties, propelling the genre forward by replacing the crazed boffin with a lab experiment, perfectly fitting the decade.
Shivers is basically a mad scientist movie. You start with a utopia, you put a mad scientist in there who creates a parasite that creates an orgiastic venereal disease.
A combination of aphrodisiac venereal disease that will hopefully turn the world into one beautiful, mindless orgy.
Well, I think it sounds a little crazy to me.
These parasites that slither in and out of you and look rather like feces.
These evil man-made parasites would indiscriminately penetrate anything that moved, turning their helpless victims into sex-crazed maniacs.
The pivotal scene in Shivers is the scene where Barbara Steele is taking a bath, and this thing comes up out of the drain of the tub and, quote, enters her.
This penis thing makes everyone incredibly horny.
This evil sexual experiment was soon spiraling out of control, and this orgiastic barrage of fatal copulation would prey deep on our most basic sexual fears.
A lot of people are quite disgusted by sexual acts generally. There are relationships between disease, transmission, and sexual acts, and those are the kinds of things that will elicit disgust and add to the general fear.
No one was safe from this stalking sexual predator who would launch itself at its hapless victims like a laser-guided exocet of ecstasy.
I remember seeing Shivers and enjoying the hell out of it, and thinking a lot of it was very funny.
And as the last victim falls to this man-made evil, all notions of sexual decorum were washed away. Here, the rule of sex equals death would reach its twisted sci-fi conclusion.
The fear is that sex itself causes death. Your own body will be devoured by things inside it if you have too much sex. In the 70s, where it was generally assumed, I don't know if it was true or not, but it was generally assumed that everyone was having too much sex, it was sort of the ultimate horror film.
As we entered the 1980s, the mad scientist movie would come full circle. Themes began by Frankenstein of man messing with Mother Nature would gain new significance.
You'd ever wanted to look beyond the clouds and the stars? Or to know what causes the trees to bud?
The research into genetics, the very building blocks of life, were advancing, creating a new era of fear.
What can really happen? I mean, should we mess with this stuff?
These deep anxieties about tampering with our biological makeup were grotesquely realized in The Fly, a tale of mad scientist Jeff Goldblum's protracted and gruesome decay after a botched experiment melts his DNA with that of a common fly.
The Fly actually shows the complete disintegration of a body over the entire running time of the movie, so that you're never more than 30 seconds away from watching more of Jeff Goldblum's face fall off.
My ear. And it's brilliant, and it's so horrific, that idea of horror from within, the idea of your body turning against you. It just preys on that, just something deep within the psyche.
As Goldblum's DNA is gradually overwhelmed by that of the flies, the film preys on a very common human fear, the fear of degenerative illness.
That's disgusting.
It terrifies us all. That's a very real, cancer, diseases that eat us, they're very real fears for all of us. So to see them realized, or to see them writ large like that, it's scary and fascinating at the same time.
It takes this central concept that's really been with us forever, that there's something dehumanizing about our technology. There is this dark side, and Cronenberg makes it so literal and so disgusting. I mean, what more can you do to a human being but reduce them to an insect?
The end is nigh. The single rogue scientist has become a horror standard, but another more encompassing threat has proved equally fruitful for the perfect scary movie. Since the 1940s, the total destruction of our planet has become a human preoccupation. And for Hollywood, it's become a weapon to tantalize and tease us with.
Once the atom bomb exploded, the ideas of the villagers in the castle and the pitchforks were, kind of old hat. And what people were afraid of was that they were going to wake up the next morning and there wasn't going to be a world.
And bizarrely, the first scary movie of the nuclear age was actually made by the US government, preparing America for the threat of atomic attack. And rather than ban children from seeing it, they were physically forced to watch it in classrooms across the country, where they learnt that preparing for graduation was probably a waste of time.
There are two kinds of attack, with warning and without any warning. We think that most of the time we will be warned before the bomb explodes.
And I thought, oh, he's talking about the end of humanity.
Remember to keep your face and the back of your neck covered tightly. Then, if the glass breaks and flies through the air, it won't cut you.
Oh, I'll put my back against the wall and I won't look at the windows, so I won't get glass shards in my face while I melt!
Duck and Cover's phenomenal power to reduce children to quivering wrecks was too good for Hollywood to pass up, and a new breed of sci-fi shockers was unleashed, cashing in on the hideous side effects of atomic radiation.
It gave us a great catch-all sort of reason for animals to get bigger.
Them typified the 1950s big bug scary movies, which attempted to terrify children with barely mobile atomic mutated insects that stalked the nuclear testing grounds of Arizona.
It was based on some of the scientific studies around the bomb sites where these insects would survive it, but would mutate.
Today, the sight of flammable rubber ants is unlikely to intimidate even a rookie rent-a-kill officer. But for the film's target audience of the day, Them really was utterly terrifying.
When I saw the picture, I was probably about 7 years old. And it was absolutely terrifying.
Your perception of a movie has everything to do with who you are and where you see it and how you see it and who you see it with.
Them was utterly terrifying to the children of the 50s, whose every waking moment was spent contemplating their total destruction. And even the film's young stars had to be comforted at the mere thought of those pesky mutant ants. For the shell-shocked children of the 1950s, there was simply no respite. A wave of alien invasion movies warned that if they somehow survived World War III, there was a high chance that opportunist alien invaders would finish the job.
So we all thought we were being invaded by flying saucers.
This new paranoia was inspired by a catalogue of alleged sightings of UFOs hovering above America. As the nation watched the sky, occasionally such sights would be caught on film, although inexplicably never in focus.
After the UFO scares, there were a lot of, it came from outer space, War of the Worlds, invasion movies.
People turning south from the freeway were startled when they saw 3 flying saucers high over Hollywood Boulevard.
However, there was one slight problem. They were galactically awful. The aliens didn't just resemble saucepan lids glued to fishing line, they were saucepan lids glued to fishing line. Cosmic.
The plots were good, they're well made, well acted, but as soon as you cut to the bad monster, or you cut to that rocket ship...
Holy mackerel.
So it wasn't very scary, and we had to wait until like the late 70s till technology sort of caught up with us for aliens to actually be very convincing on screen.
Ridley Scott's Alien would finally deliver a truly horrendous vision of an alien life form, when a crew of astronauts inadvertently bring a deadly parasitical alien back to their spaceship.
When this thing burst out of the egg and clamped itself onto John Hurt, it was obviously something that had never ever been seen before.
The design of the facehugger was truly terrifying and would build on the parasite created for Shivers to tap into a myriad of fears deep within the audience's subconscious.
The idea of the facehugger, the idea that we're like husks for a creature to impregnate us and give birth is twisted genius.
It's turning skull. I know.
Psychoanalysts would say, well, this is very similar to kind of sexual penetration and is likely to cause anxiety and fear through that kind of route.
What's it got down his throat? I would suggest it's feeding him oxygen.
It's disgusting in the sense that we don't like disgusting things to enter our mouths, and in fact, disgust as an emotion is characterized as a fear of oral incorporation. That is, we don't put mucus into our mouth, we don't put feces or vomit into our mouths.
Alien is a terrific build-up because you've seen John Hurt with this ghastly thing on his face, and they've worked to get it off, and then suddenly he's okay, and everybody's so happy, and it's just terrific. They sit down to their meal.
They would soon realize the facehugger was simply for starters. Even the cast weren't fully aware of the true horror they were about to face.
They never told everybody just how much blood they were going to use.
Those were one-offs. Everybody's reaction was just, I mean, it was just, I think the proximity of the thing, telling you you'd get a little blood, you don't think about it much, just the fascination of actually watching the thing happen and give birth.
You could not do that shot without blood. That's what the sequence is all about, a man being ripped open.
And the relentlessness of the film would continue. This alien birth was simply the first step in the alien's bloody evolution.
the process of it growing, I mean, it became the face hugger. In a very short period of time, it becomes that penis thing, and that runs off. And the next thing you see, it's sort of like in a, you're not quite sure what you're seeing. It's like it's growing.
All right, now.
Wait, don't let him go!
What the hell are you doing, man?
Alien excelled in its use of busing, a scary movie technique that gives the audience a fake jump moments before the true shock.
You see, that's really clever because you get a jump with the cat, but then the alien is very slow. It just drips down behind him. It's not like a boo, it's almost like, see, you can do it that way, but this way's even scarier, you know.
That thing's coming at you, not because it's mad, because it has to live. And that's way different.
And the alien's relentlessness was compounded in the film's terrifying climax, where Ripley, the lone survivor, would discover the true meaning of isolation.
And you've been looking at it the entire time, and it looks like it's big tubes and pieces of the wall, and it comes forward. You go, oh my God. And where do you go? In a lot of ways, it was a groundbreaking movie all the way through.
Religion has always been the sworn enemy of science, and it too would shock the world with a wave of utterly terrifying, scary movies starring satanic children.
For some reason, in these films, the devil will nearly always take over a sweet, innocent child, just like me. I don't think it would ever happen.
You're all gonna die. You're all gonna die!
Prepare to witness an innocent child possessed by such satanic evil that breath would freeze and her own body would cry out for help. And a devious yet beautiful naked witch, the horror. Brace yourselves for the disciples of the occult. Age-old fears of the occult, witchcraft and Satan himself have plagued us for centuries.
Witchcraft has a huge history in Britain. There are great panics of witches in whatever century you like to look at, particularly, of course, 15th and 16th century, where you actually have people being accused of witchcraft. You have tens of thousands of people being imprisoned, tortured, and you have thousands of people actually being executed for being witches.
And all the birds were filled with their flesh.
Anything different to the norm is up for castigation. It has to be eliminated in case it turns against you.
The first wave of occult scary movies, such as Witchfinder General, were always period pieces, and whilst the historical detail was never less than top-notch, the sight of peasants wincing in silly hats and knitted tights wasn't exactly conducive to creating the perfect scary movie.
You can divorce yourself from it. You know, you can put up a barrier between you because that's the old days.
But witchcraft continues in the modern era, and as the values of Christianity came under attack in the 1960s, paganism and the occult came above ground, provoking fresh anxieties and stoking age-old fears.
Our knowledge of what's really going on is minuscule, and there is plenty of reason to fear.
Witchcraft. In 1973, our continuing fears of witchcraft and the occult would be explored in The Wicker Man. Whilst on first glance it appears about as scary as a fancy dress party in Dorset, it would soon descend into a chilling tale of human sacrifice and pagan worship set in contemporary Britain.
I think with Wicker Man, because it was set in the present day, in a way it made it all the more scary, because you thought, well, this could happen.
The story of the Wicker Man is this devout Christian cop who's been sent to a Scottish island to find this missing girl who's been reported missing by them.
A complaint has been registered by a resident of this island about a missing child. Now that makes it a police matter, private property or not.
He represented us all, the ordinary man or woman, going into that situation and bad things happening as they could happen to us.
The Wicker Man was an assault on the Christian morality of 1970s Britain, as our hero, played by Edward Woodward, slowly realises he's in the midst of a group of pagans with seemingly demonic intent. Their sacred rites of free sex in pub car parks and human sacrifice would prey deep on his God-fearing soul.
There's this great scene with Christopher Lee, who is the kind of lord of the island. Now, Woodward is a deeply devout Christian man. I mean, he believes in, you know, the one true God, and Christopher Lee says to him, "Your God is dead."
Well, he's dead. He can't complain. He had his chance, and in modern parlance, blew it.
Religion plays a really important role in making him feel completely alone, powerless. They take his authority away of him being a policeman. It means nothing out there. They don't care that he's a cop. He's actually completely powerless by the end of it and completely alone.
This twist on the rule of isolation, here spiritual isolation, would be compounded throughout the film, as the witches continue to attack Woodward's stringent Christian beliefs.
Brett Eklund decides to try and seduce the virginal policeman. She is a witch, she's doing an incantation, and she's completely naked.
He doesn't see her, but he hears her, and he's aroused, and he's ashamed of himself. And because he's so ashamed of himself, he knows he's going to be punished. And at the end, of course, he is punished very severely.
You came here to find Rowan Morrison. But it is we who have found you and brought you here.
The reason that Woodward was lured to the island was, of course, they needed a sacrifice. He was a virgin, he was pure, they wanted a male, he came representing the king of purity, and therefore he was, theoretically, the perfect sacrifice.
Oh God! Oh Jesus Christ!
And Lee's unholy intentions would be finally realised in the film's spectacular finale, with Woodward's horrific sacrifice to appease the pagan gods.
The ending of The Wicker Man was extremely powerful. The burning of the man of God, clearly the crucifixion of Christ.
Lord's my shepherd!
They were reacting to a certain extent to a universal quality, a universal feeling that somehow the good must be sacrificed.
However, this contemporary tale of witchcraft and the occult was absolutely loathed by its British studio, so upset by its overt sexual themes and blasphemy that they took the film from its makers and cut out the offending scenes.
So when they were saying we have to cut this or this in The Wicker Man, they were also saying we have to stop doing this in the counterculture.
Despite the studio's best efforts, The Wicker Man became a huge cult hit with American students, whose interest in the occult was blossoming. And in this environment, a very real threat to American morality had surfaced with the publication of Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible, a manifesto for the worship of the Dark Lord.
Naturally, of course, an outcry, particularly from very evangelical Christian groups.
It sold in huge numbers, and this, of course, frightened many people.
This hysteria surrounding Satanism was simply too perfect for Hollywood to pass up. They had found their new leading man, Satan himself.
Satan. Personally, I don't think the devil or Satan is terrifying. It's how you handle it. And in the case of The Exorcist, they treated it like it was clinically real.
I'm a complete atheist. And during the length of that movie, I had total suspension of disbelief. I completely bought it.
In 1973, director William Friedkin would unleash The Exorcist. This iconic scene marks the entrance of a man of God sent to rescue a 12-year-old girl possessed by satanic forces.
William Friedkin went, you know what, folks? We're not playing around here. This is all real.
The film was based on a true story of satanic possession in the late 1940s, giving credence to the film's truly disturbing premise.
It was a boy, and I guess he was about a 15-year-old, something like that. And it was considered very true. There definitely was a feeling in the crew that we're fooling around with something that we shouldn't be.
Playing the lead role of Regan was 12-year-old Linda Blair, whose guttural groans would mark the beginning of her terrifying descent into hell.
Are you the person inside of Regan?
There isn't anything that could have prepared a child or an adult for the experience that we were about to go through.
The terrified faces of Linda's carers would mirror those of 1970s audiences. The Exorcist would go further into previously taboo territory than any film had ever dared before.
It's just so unnerving to see something that's innocent change into something evil. I think that's what is so upsetting and disturbing for people. It is for me.
And the true psychological terror of The Exorcist was achieved by its sacrilegious onslaught that would attack all of society's major beliefs.
The sour is mine. Fuck me! Fuck me!
It actually represents this great defilement of the child, defilement of religion, and everything that sort of we're expected to believe in.
I think that it's the purpose of the scary movie to attack what we fundamentally hold dear. You know, it's like there are reasons certain things are sacred. It's because we don't want them altered or threatened.
Even today, that famous scene of the child masturbating with the crucifix is something that, I mean, it still takes your breath away.
This notorious scene is just as shocking today. It remains one of the most unsettling images ever produced for mainstream cinema.
When it came to the crucifix scene, no one sat down and said, this is what it is. I was too young, nor should they have. It was all done very mechanically. I never understood what it was or why people were so upset about it till later.
Lick me! Lick me!
You can't find anything more vile than that. But then what would Satan do to show his total disdain and disgust for God? That's how he would do it.
The devil has no conscience. He has no limits. He can do whatever he likes. And if you want to make something really nasty, how nasty can you get? And that's how nasty he got.
And the degradation of the child would continue into the exorcism itself, where cutting-edge special effects made the devil's vile tirade seem shockingly real to audiences of the time.
Amen.
God, defender of the humans!
If you hadn't have shocked the people, if we hadn't have gone as far as we did, it wouldn't have worked at all.
The movie absolutely took not just this country, but the entire world by storm.
The Exorcist became the highest-grossing scary movie of all time, taking over $160 million in the cinema alone, with people queuing up for hours to watch children mutilate themselves and swear at vicars.
That film's reputation really did precede it.
I can't believe a movie can scare an adult that bad that people would be fainting and leaving before it's over and stuff.
The anticipation and excitement was so great that when the house was packed, when the lights went down, everybody went, ah! You know, we were so scared. It said Warner Brothers, ah! You know.
One was told that there were ambulances outside cinemas, that people were fainting, they couldn't take it, that it was really deeply disturbing. People were trying to stop it being put on.
You saw people thinking they were possessed. You saw all these false exorcisms. The Catholic Church was absolutely appalled.
However, for Hollywood, the concerns of the Western world's biggest religion were merely minor quibbles. The public's faith was being answered by their wallets, and in Tinseltown, that could mean only one thing.
The devil. They just hit this devil thing, the 666.
And throughout the 70s, a slew of satanic films involving scary children hit our screens, exemplified by the 1976 classic, The Omen.
I always think of it as being like this sort of, almost like an airport novel film, because it's kind of like brilliantly trashy and incredibly watchable and really well made.
And in a desperate bid to top The Exorcist in the scary kid stakes, The Omen featured this cherubic-faced 5-year-old, Damien, the actual son of Satan.
Whereas in The Exorcist, you kind of feel sorry for the girl because the girl's just possessed. It's all happening against her will. She's merely a vessel that's been taken over by evil. Damien is himself evil incarnate, so you can have no sympathy for him whatsoever.
It's about the terrible twos, really. It's about that period when they're just real little brats.
And the son of Satan and his diabolical cohorts were made even more terrifying by their own signature tune. This choral score inspired by Carmina Burana by Carl Orff.
You can use it to help the audience predict when something scary is going to happen. Now, if you do that, then you're basically doubling your scares, because you've made something which wasn't previously scary.
Every time that started, you knew all hell was about to break loose, and it stayed with me for years.
And scary music would predict The Omen's real terror. Scenes of satanic murder that were lovingly choreographed and so diabolically ingenious that they could only have been concocted in the pits of hell. Or worse still, in a Hollywood pitching session.
It was very stagey in the sense of they lingered on each death.
What's happening is that the director is building up an anticipation of fear on each successive occasion. And each time it occurs and it happens, the next time the fear will be even greater.
And this scene would be the culmination of Damien's satanic purge, with a build-up to possibly the most creative death scene ever committed to celluloid. It would not only slowly tease Damien's murderous plan, but also highlight his utter contempt for the MOT certificate.
We started getting excited because we know he's going to get his head cut off. It's just a question of how, and it really doesn't disappoint.
It was protracted, slow motion, 9 angles, and you just watch it going, oh my God, that's a severed head. I can't believe that.
And the huge success of The Omen meant the sequels would inevitably follow like the hounds of hell. And as the poster screamed, the first time was only a warning. How right they were.
Omen 2 is literally just more of the same. It's just more and more people going, hang on, this kid's a bit rum. He seems to have the blood of a jackal. He seems to be the Antichrist. And, oh, now I'm killed.
They became less authentic and kind of vanished as a genre.
However, another kind of evil possession has never failed to raise a scream. The possession of the home.
Haunted house and horror films, I mean, they were made for one another.
Haunted house. Fears of ghosts and hauntings have been a very real fear for centuries, of spirits from the other world returning to haunt the homes and minds of those unfortunate enough to be blighted by this paranormal phenomenon.
So whenever you have a haunted house, you're getting into deep psychological territory.
Insanity is associated with a haunted house, and are with hauntings, and with something that can get into your head, or is it already in your head?
The notion of the haunted house representing mental chaos would be perfectly exemplified in The Shining.
It is absolutely terrifying. It is completely gothic and full of the most ghastly kind of events and images, but so many of them completely stay with you.
The Shining charted one family's journey to the edge of madness, brought on by the oppressive Overlook Hotel. It employed the rules for the scary movie to perfection, starting with the golden rule of isolation, cutting off the family not only from the outside world, but also any sense of salvation.
The Shining was a perfect canvas. It gave you isolation. It gave you a hotel, like a grand haunted house that has 400 rooms. It gives you 400,000 different possibilities.
The terrifying possibilities of deserted ballrooms, bedrooms, and miles of unending corridors were fully utilized by director Kubrick, instilling the hotel with intense feelings of doom and foreboding.
Just that one image of the red carpet and the child on the tricycle and, as I say, feeling these corridors kind of coming in, and you could just see the image and be frightened by it.
And a child in jeopardy is always, it always cuts in somehow the deepest.
And in this atmosphere of intense paranoia, of the young child isolated, the hotel reveals its murderous past.
Hello, Danny.
Kubrick used a lot of subliminal shots, almost, that you saw twins, and you saw them as they were, and then you see them as they've become.
Come and play with us, Danny. Forever and ever and ever.
It registers on your mind, but not quite. It goes into the subconscious rather than your mind. And it's very, very effective. You're being scared when you don't know why you're being scared.
And it's just a real nightmare.
But the real nightmare would be the murderous effect the evil hotel would have on the already unstable father figure of Jack Nicholson as he slowly descends into madness. The classic premise of the haunted house film.
The haunted house story often has someone bringing their own psychological problems into another kind of boiler.
Madness makes us regress to that animalistic inheritance, the loss of control, the loss of cognition. They have crossed that boundary and we don't quite know where they are.
And the extent of Jack's madness is revealed to his terrified wife in chilling fashion when she inspects the book he's been writing for the past few months.
The moment at the end, which is ghastly, where you know Jack Nicholson has not been writing his book at all work and no play.
He's writing the same sentence over and over and over again. You're never quite sure at first whether it's the house or it's Jack Nicholson. Is he going crazy? And you find out in the end it's a bit of both.
Red rum! Red rum!
Both Jack's and the hotel's murderous intentions are revealed in the film's chilling finale. The perfect opportunity for the textbook deployment of the double jump.
Just then, the first sort of axe comes through the door.
And Jack's unrelenting determination to murder his wife and child would give the scary movie its most iconic line.
Here's Johnny!
It's almost a shame because we knew the man when he was quite sane. So we understand what he was like, but in the end, in the film, he had to go because it would leave you with too many nightmares if he was still alive.
Jack's demise gave audiences some well-deserved relief. However, for a new generation of scary movie makers, the well-being of their viewers was the last thing on their minds. By the 1970s, the Psycho Killer movie had come of age, unleashing a new generation of chainsaw-wielding psychopaths, hell-bent on violent, bloody death to all in their path.
After the arrival of psycho killers, all people wanted to see was mindless violence.
Ladies and gentlemen, brace yourselves. You are about to witness the most notorious murder in cinema history. Meet a twisted teen slasher with knives for fingers, and come face to face with the world's most notorious power tool killer. All of these inhabit the volatile world of the Psycho Killer.
What really scares me? People. People really scare me because people kill people. I don't know one person killed by a vampire or a werewolf or Godzilla. You know, I really don't. I mean, people scare the shit out of me.
Since Jack the Ripper terrorized Victorian England, the psycho killer has become a media phenomenon. Capable of unthinkable acts of sadism and slaughter, we are both fascinated and fearful of this new breed of gruesome celebrity.
There's a guy out there that's killing certain people, and you don't know where he's going to strike next. It means you could be the next victim.
They look just like us. They are just like us. And that represents a very chilling shift in horror films.
We kicked off the modern era. We made movies about Ed Gein.
In the late 50s, Ed Gein became America's first celebrity serial killer. His horrific crimes shocked the world, not simply for their monstrous nature, but because on the surface, this farmer had seemed so normal.
Nice man, just like anybody else.
Ed Gein is the is the poster boy for the psychopathic killer. Ed Gein is a guy in Wisconsin who killed a few folks and, you know, ate some flesh and wore their faces and danced in the moonlight. And he was insane.
The news broke of that. Everybody was horrified, totally horrified, because it shouldn't happen in this normal world we usually live in.
And legendary filmmaker Alfred Hitchcock was certainly watching.
I suppose it all started with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho.
One of the most influential films ever made, probably.
All-American Psycho.
In this house, the most dire, horrible events took place.
In 1961, master of suspense Alfred Hitchcock would release Psycho. Loosely based on the horrific crimes of Ed Gein, Psycho would kickstart the psycho killer genre and shock audiences around the world.
Psycho's brilliance, for me, is the way Hitchcock plays with you.
She looked like a wrong one to you?
Acted like one.
You think it's a film about Janet Leigh is stealing something to be with her boyfriend, and you think it's about that.
On the run and late at night, Psycho's heroine Janet Leigh seeks shelter in the isolated Bates Motel, a choice which would turn out to be the worst accommodation arrangement in the history of film.
It's obviously a place that has been left behind. That's great, the old dark house in the middle of the woods, and it turns suddenly, becomes a movie about this lonely guy in a motel.
You have a vacancy?
Oh, we have 12 vacancies. 12 cabins, 12 vacancies.
But Psycho's real star was Norman Bates, seemingly the archetypal boy next door.
This extraordinary performance by Anthony Perkins. He's boyish, he's charming, he's using every single element of his sort of Ivy League, charismatic, virginal damaged youth.
Is your time so empty?
No. Well, I run the office and tend the cabins and grounds and do little errands for my mother.
And here he is, you know, with those birds nailed up on the wall behind him. And Janet Leigh walks in with those 38 Bs, that bustier from Madonna breast. I mean, this isn't a cold Hitchcock heroine now. This is Janet Leigh, who's definitely warm. Think about the opening scene in that movie. You know, she's laying there in a brassiere making love to John Gavin on a bed. We hardly saw that back then in movies, unless they were from France. Hey, bad kittens have sex. We have to kill you.
Psycho would establish the rule that would dominate the Freudian world of the psycho killer movie. Sex equals death.
You know, had a little mousy librarian showed up, you know, Norman Bates might have been all right, but Janet Leigh was the catalyst.
She's going in to wash away her sins, literally in this shower.
Janet Leigh in the shower scene really epitomizes every woman's fear. Here she is, naked. She's in a shower. There's all this clean water. It's a safe environment. And to have this happen to her, this monstrous attack, it is profoundly shocking for anyone who watches.
The power of this iconic scene was further intensified by the revolutionary music and sound design.
You never see that dagger go into a body. You hear the noise.
All of a sudden the violins go up to the top and then you know, I mean, that sound goes right to your nervous system and you're frozen to that.
It sounds like a knife. That's what his strings sound like. They're high pitched. That sounds like a knife cutting you.
She was the star, and she's murdered. It's like, wait, what? I mean, that was really radical.
Psycho had rewritten the rules for the scary movie. The blood had been spilled, and for the Psycho killer film, there was no way back. And as he entered the 1970s, he would become increasingly volatile, and his killings even more senseless.
Why did horror movies in the 70s become more violent? And I have Vietnam.
Beautiful friend. By 1975, 200,000 young American soldiers had been slaughtered in the hugely unpopular Vietnam War. This was carnage on a grand scale that would rip apart the American psyche.
The 70s, there was such an explosion of violence in cinema, and it was very much a reflection of the fact that people were watching the Vietnam War on television every night. There were images day after day of soldiers, you know, getting killed and being blown up.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out, of course, during the Vietnam War. It's explicitly a commentary on the butchery that was taking place during that conflict. Here we have senseless, mindless, visceral violence.
From the opening frame, you knew you were doomed. Once it started, it never stopped.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre centered around a group of teenagers seeking help at an isolated farmhouse after their van breaks down. And whilst the concept was nothing new, it was the execution, quite literally, that would raise the stakes for the perfect scary movie.
Hello? The opening scene in Leatherface's house, that scene when Kurt first gets it, is so scary because he's got this shot of this metal door, and there are these skins hanging, and he does a few cuts in, and you hear these weird pig noises, and you're like, is that an animal behind there? Is that a person?
He was hit hard enough to definitely force broken skull material down into the brain and most likely cause convulsions. I think that was, you know, it was outrageous and startling.
Tobe Hooper needs to be watched at all times, needs to be regulated, because those are just evil ideas.
Door closed, that's it, no more information.
Kirk?
And when Pam goes there and they have that brilliant shot off the swing, you're slowly creeping, you're going, don't go in that house, don't go in that house.
And one by one, as the kids go to investigate, the rule of curiosity kills would be pushed to its grisly, unforgiving conclusion.
Yeah, he seems to bring the problems on him or herself by investigating something. But actually, that's kind of the way it is in real life.
Unlike his brooding predecessor Norman Bates, Texas Chainsaw's Leatherface was a much more chilling prospect.
He is a killer. He's obviously quite insane and quite violent. That's what, to me, made Leatherface such a terrifying character. He's not human, but he's almost human. He's the most horrific of things. He isn't a giant lizard. He's a human being who isn't human.
But just like Norman Bates, Leatherface shared the same terrifying heritage.
The idea of the mask was inspired by Ed Gein.
He would take people and skin them and then wear the skin.
He inspired that element of the film.
The spectre of Ed Gein may have loomed large over Leatherface, but it was his iconic choice of weapon that would earn him his place in the Horror Hall of Fame.
Stop!
What would that be like, you know, if you were attacked with that thing?
It has all the features that elicit our innate predator defense mechanisms. It moves, it has jerky movements, it has loud noise associated with it. and of course it has teeth. So much better than a gun.
One of the greatest moments in Texas Chainsaw Massacre is when you realize this girl is not going to be done in by a chainsaw, but she's going to be done in by Grandpa, the old guy who used to work at the slaughterhouse.
It was this sadistic torture scene of the last survivor that would give the world nightmares.
She says something like, "I'll do anything."
I'll do anything you want.
And there's a kind of implied sexual content. You know, screw me if that's what it takes to get me out of here. But when she says this, nobody reacts. They just keep right on doing what they do because it means nothing to them. The whole idea that she can defend herself or has anything to give them is just not true.
You kind of want him to kill her in one hit, but he can't quite do it. He's not strong enough, so it's making it worse. He's just beating her to death.
It's torture. So it's just the filmmaker torturing the audience as much as that character is being tortured. That's the key.
Finally, the viewer is thrown a morsel of respite when the girl escapes. But for many, this was too little, too late. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre would come under vicious attack and would ultimately be banned for its harrowing scenes.
Harper's Magazine did an article, it was a cover story called The Pornography of Violence. And it referred to Chainsaw Massacre, I love this phrase, they referred to Chainsaw Massacre as a vile little piece of sick crap with literally nothing to recommend it.
The genius of Texas Chainsaw Massacre is that it is remembered as one of the most violent, bloody, sick, gory films ever made, when in fact the film has very little violence in it. It's essentially a bloodless movie. People would walk out of that movie remembering seeing a girl impaled on a meat hook. You never see it. You see her face and you hear that noise, but you never see anything in that film. There's nothing on screen that will ever be more scary than what you have in your head. And the best horror filmmakers are the ones that evoke that. So that when you walk out of the theater, you remember the things that you imagined.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Psycho had laid the groundwork for the Psycho Killer movie. However, there was a final step in its evolution as it threw off its cultural baggage and streamlined itself to become a pure scare machine.
In the late 70s, John Carpenter came out with a movie called Halloween, which basically just got it all right. He got rid of the social commentary and the politics and just made a bang-on, pure, scary film.
Let's nail the audience to the back of the theater. That was the idea.
Teen slashers.
The 1978 release of Halloween was the birth of the teen slasher, a genre specifically targeted towards the prime audience of the scary movie, teenagers.
I think what a lot of teenagers have in common is a fear of untimely death. But the reason it's so scary is the kids don't think this could ever happen to one of them.
So Halloween's setup of a group of all-American schoolgirls on the brink of womanhood whose lives were about to be cut short by a lone, crazed, knife-wielding psychopathic lunatic with a grudge simply couldn't fail.
Paul dragged me into the boys' locker room.
Exploring uncharted territory.
Totally charted. Just talk. Sure.
Well, the idea in Halloween was that you have these young teenagers who are babysitting children. The whole setup, it makes for the victims being more innocent and vulnerable.
What about the boogeyman?
There's no such thing.
Richie said he was coming after me tonight.
Do you believe everything Richie tells you?
No.
The character that Jamie Lee Curtis plays in Halloween is actually really cleverly crafted, because unlike the other girls, she's sort of the geek, really. She's the outsider. She doesn't wear sexy clothing. She's obviously a virgin. She studies hard. She takes her books home from school and all her friends mock her. And all of these codes in her character make you think she's going to survive, she's going to make it.
But the same couldn't be said for Jamie's sex-obsessed friend PJ Souls, whose version of homework was an intensive one-on-one with a class beneath the sheets. And as Psycho had shown, there's nothing more likely to enrage a serial killer than illicit sex.
16, 17, 18-year-old kids already have a fear of sex or a fear of the consequences of sex. They're trying to establish their sexuality.
Go get me a beer.
Once a woman crosses that line, particularly if she has sex, somehow she's fair game. You know, she's just out there, she's asking for it.
Another explanation is that there was just too much sex in the 70s.
But one man was going to put a stop to all this flagrant fornication. Moral crusader and psycho killer extraordinaire, the man with the mask, Michael Myers.
What makes Michael Myers such a great killer is that he's really a patient stalker. He doesn't just run in, stab someone the first chance he gets and run out. He takes his time.
See anything you like?
When PJ Souls is in bed, he comes in with a sheet with the glasses on his head and he stands there. And he lets her get worked up, going, come on. Are you playing hard to get? What's that? She's like, he goads her into it. He's enjoying that moment.
Hello? All right, Annie. First I get your famous chewing, now I get your famous squealing.
That's really creepy.
Halloween builds to showcase a virtuoso deployment of the perfect scary movie rules. Jamie Lee Curtis's curiosity to the fate of her friends leads her to an isolated house where she discovers her friends have all been killed in inventive ways whilst experiencing multiple jumps. Textbook.
And she goes upstairs and, you know, your heart rate goes up one notch. She sees her best friend dead. Various doors open and, like, all her friends are revealed to her. One jump, another jump, and your heart's like, and your heart rate's already peaked, and then suddenly,
but Halloween's most enduring legacy was that its monster could never die. Michael would take a knitting needle in the neck, a knife in the chest, and 6 direct hits at point-blank range. And still he would live to stalk again.
The audience just filled in the blanks. They didn't ask why. They just went, ooh, when he wasn't there in the end, which made me feel very good.
Halloween became a massive worldwide hit, going on to become the biggest independent film ever released. Its enormous influence on the Psycho Killer movie would reverberate throughout the 1980s.
Halloween had all the elements that became a formula over the next 10 years.
It was the precursor to Friday the 13th and obviously Nightmare on Elm Street.
Nightmare on Elm Street would become the biggest horror franchise of the 80s. It stuck to the rigid teen slasher formula created by Halloween, but by adding a supernatural twist, it would become the stuff of real nightmares.
Nightmare on Elm Street is the story of 4 friends, high school friends, who are plagued by the same nightmare. And they realize a child molester had been murdered by their parents in an act of vigilantism, and the end result is Freddy Krueger.
This is God.
Freddy Krueger is able to come into your dreams while you're sleeping and kill you. And if you die in your dreams, you die forever.
No one's really exploited the nightmare before. You know, Wes was really the first to know how universal and what a great hook it is, you know, because everybody has them.
So with the safety net of logic removed, Krueger was given free rein to slaughter gormless, moaning teenagers in the most flamboyant fashion imaginable.
What was great about it is that it totally frees the director and the writer's mind to kill people in the most ridiculous way possible.
And he could do anything he wanted in the dream, you know. So he was much more creative than the other ones.
And Freddy's masterclass in pubescent slaughter would begin in spectacular style, while still adhering to the golden rule of the Psycho Killer movie.
She's the first victim because of all of us. She's the slut.
It was more about this kind of like inexplicable violence that was this suddenly taking place, this kind of, you know, unexplained atrocity, which was where the horror came from.
Freddy's supernatural powers were both the film's biggest strength and its biggest weakness. Already dead, Freddy took the rule of the monster never dies to, frankly, silly extremes.
Well, if there's no rules to this thing, like if you beat him by saying, I don't believe in you, you exist, and he disappears, and then he's back again like 30 seconds later.
With one of the worst special effects ever.
Yeah, the ending of Nightmare on Elm Street is quite a corker in that respect for the dummy.
Old rubber legs going through the door. It's concurrent in all those films where you've got a kind of faceless, moral monster hacking up kids for, you know, having sex and drinking. But, you know, how a child murderer can become a hero is you know, it's kind of like, hang on.
But child murderer Krueger did become a hero, and Nightmare on Elm Street spawned 7 sequels, during which Freddy got bumped off a death-defying 18 times. And for Hollywood, that meant $20 million per death.
One might suspect that the reason for making them would be, hey, we can make a little tiny low-budget movie using these horror cliches and make a ton of money. That's the way Hollywood thinks.
Inevitably, with any cycle, things kind of peter out. Like, you know, the end of the Nightmare on Elm Street sequels was kind of like the end of like sort of really special effects laden horror for a while. There was a point at the end of the kind of the 80s and early 90s where we'd seen everything we could possibly see with animatronic special effects, and we're kind of sick of it, and then there's a back to basics approach.
Dear viewer, we are nearing our chilling climax as we prepare to explore a new breed of scary movie, so realistic that people thought they were actually witnessing real torture, death, and cannibalism.
I think one thing I always sort of found really ridiculous was the whole sort of cannibalism thing, because I always thought that was, you know, I didn't buy that really. I don't know how anybody could, you know, how one person could eat another person. It's just ridiculous.
What? What Edgar would have wanted?
The quest to discover the formula for the perfect scary movie has raged for over a century, with each new genre adding to the golden rules. The monster movie gave us the first and most important: isolate your victim.
They can't find you. Nobody can save you. You're lost.
Science fiction warned us that man's curiosity would inevitably kill.
Obviously, if this guy is dabbling with stuff he shouldn't be dabbling with, it's going to go wrong.
And the Psycho movie led audiences to equate sex with death.
Jungle Man fixed Jane.
They'd see 2 kids mating in a little cabin. They're going, yeah, it's coming, and ah!
As the scary movie entered the 1980s, Hollywood had become reliant on the formulaic special effects shocker. However, there was a final twist in the development of the perfect scary movie.
The only way for a horror film to work is to take us by surprise, to throw the rule book out of the window.
And I think the logical conclusion to that was to go more docudrama, was to go more garage band.
And in 1981, Cannibal Holocaust would do just that. And by appearing like real documentary footage, it would convince the world it actually contained scenes of real-life torture, executions, and cannibalism.
This was the movie that you couldn't stomach, that you shouldn't see, that was too terrifying, that was too horrific. And it's also the only one that actually lives up to that hype.
Cannibal Holocaust was a low-budget Italian gore fest that capitalized on the global hunger for increasingly gory, scary movies. However, by appearing like a real-life documentary, it was quite unlike anything the world had ever seen.
The premise of Cannibal Holocaust is a professor who goes into an Amazon jungle because a team of documentary makers have gone missing. So he goes to look for them, and he comes across a kind of a cannibalistic tribe.
Academic hotshot Munro excelled at his work in the field, and few could rival his hands-on approach to anthropology. That business of the missing American film crew would just have to wait.
I got along very well with the indigenous people.
However, the cannibals' interest in the body of young Munro would turn out to be far from playful.
And they seem like peaceful people until he finds the shrine of all their gutted corpses.
These grisly remains were in fact the bodies of the slaughtered and partially devoured American documentary crew, and their abandoned film canisters, which when opened would reveal just why Cannibal Holocaust was regarded as the most gruesomely depraved film ever made.
The recovered footage shows absolutely ridiculous stuff. I mean, there's people being slit from, you know, the entire body. There's a woman impaled. There's a guy clubbing a woman to death with blood going everywhere. It's absolutely, it broke every single taboo, and it's the most gruesome thing I have ever watched.
There was one girl who cheated on her husband and got pregnant, and these women hold her down, they reach up inside her and rip out the fetus. They give this abortion, and it's horrifying.
I suppose it's just pushing the boundaries of everything. How much can you shock? And bringing sex into violence and horror is sort of the ultimate kind of, you know, shock tactic, isn't it?
Unsurprisingly, far from proving to be the next Hollywood blockbuster, Cannibal Holocaust was banned in over 50 countries, sparking a media frenzy.
Because of the way it was filmed, a lot of people thought it was actually a snuff film. They thought it was for real.
You believed that it might have actually been made by a maniac. It had grainy film, the camera was a little shaky, and you thought, oh my God, a psychopath could have actually, you know, cobbled the money together to make this.
And that's exactly what they thought in its country of origin.
The film was prosecuted in Italy.
And it was this scene of a native impaled on a stake that convinced the Italian prosecutors that the film did involve genuine slaughter.
The director went to court and had to show photos and evidence that it was just their makeup girl.
What they had was a pole under her with a bicycle seat that she was sitting on. And then the pole supposedly went through her body, and then it stuck out her mouth. And that she just held that in her mouth. The actors, on the other hand, the court thought he killed them. So he had to send to New York to bring the actors to Italy into the courtroom to show that they're still living.
And with the arrival of the cast, the court finally believed that these scenes of the crew's grisly demise were in fact just elaborate special effects, and the charges were dropped. However, Cannibal Holocaust remained banned across the world. In Britain, it was illegal to screen the film until 2001. A situation very few of the viewing public cared about.
The audiences just didn't want to support it. The people paying the tickets eventually decide where the taste line is.
Cannibal Holocaust proved that in the quest for the perfect scary movie, you can go too far. Excessive gore and sexual violence simply turned off the audience.
There is one good thing that came out of Cannibal Holocaust, and that's that whole idea of, you know, lost footage, documentary type vibe to the whole thing, which makes the viewer believe that all that they're seeing is actually real. And it gave way to one of the most successful scary movies of all time, the Blair Witch Project.
Everyone believed it. And it's a terrifying film.
In 1998, the ultra-low-budget Blair Witch Project would be unleashed on an unsuspecting public. Stripped down, raw and seemingly real, it would reinvent and reinvigorate the scary movie, and in the process become the most profitable fright fest of all time.
Lights are on. We're ready to go.
The Blair Witch Project is a film about 3 student filmmakers from Maryland who go out into the woods to shoot a movie on the mythology of the Blair Witch, and in the process get lost in the woods. Strange and surreal. Very scary things start happening to them.
It's gonna be getting dark real soon. Look, I'm not saying for certain.
We're not camping here.
Maybe we're near the car. Maybe we're near the car.
Give me the fucking map. Give me the map.
Shot on high-street video cameras, the style of Blair Witch had the instant familiarity of a home movie.
What Blair Witch did so brilliantly is it brought it home for the video age. It made it relatable to everybody.
And to add to the realism, the cast had no idea of what was about to happen. All the actors had were basic instructions that the directors would leave for them throughout the forest.
The whole notion of the film was that we were going to improv, you know, not only our characters, but all the dialogue, and they were going to give us situations to respond to. So we knew going in there that our MO was to stay as natural as possible, and their MO was to fuck with us as much as possible.
Are you fucking serious?
Fucking serious. I don't have the map, okay?
If we get hurt or if we die out here, it's your fucking fault! It is your fucking fault! Do you understand? I can't believe you can be such an asshole!
slowly disintegrates before our eyes, a lot of those reactions are authentic. They were told one thing and another thing happened. So a lot of what you see in Blair Witch is genuine fear.
Hurry up! I'm coming! My boots aren't laced. Oh my God, what the fuck is that? What the fuck is that?
We were isolated and we were hungry and we were tired, and you kind of get down to the raw nerve of it, and to a certain extent you do forget what's what.
I'm scared to close my eyes. I'm scared to open them.
It is no accident that Blair Witch was as successful as it was, because although it took the formula of Cannibal Holocaust and the template, it completely left all the violence out. Cannibal Holocaust is known for its over-the-top violence. Blair Witch Project is known for the fact that you never see the witch.
And I think Blair Witch was a perfect example how people were really ready for their imaginations to actually have more control than the special effects that Hollywood is so good at putting out there.
Blair Witch had thrown out most of the rules of the scary movie, and in the process turned a budget of £15,000 into a record-breaking $120 million, making it the most profitable scary movie of all time.
I think the fact that we made a film that was scary and a little bit unprecedented and worked was one part of the success, but I also feel like it was just, you know, the stars aligning in the right way.
The Blair Witch Project, along with the other groundbreaking successes of the scary movie, have proved that whilst the rules provide the framework to terror, each generation's perfect scary movie is uniquely relevant to its time.
Look, horror will never die. Horror will always be with us, and it'll always be reinvented.
It's the only place we think about death anymore. No one's going to church anymore. So it must be the scary movie.
So just what are the evil geniuses behind the scary movie concocting to terrify us with in the future?
I've been talking to a lot of people who've been involved in today's documentary, and we've come up with a brilliant idea for a film. These jellyfish.
Which could cause our complete devastation on the planet.
And all of a sudden they're attacking
chickens and alarm clocks. And everyone is going bananas.
A hysterical priest warns them that this
giant octopus with the tentacles coming down the staircase
would take people and skin them and then wear the skin. And it's like a transvestite.
This turns out to be the son of Satan.
I think that combination really does create anxiety in the viewers.
And it would work, but it involved
doing it in 3D. All the effects are real.
And it's brilliant when you think about it. It's just brilliant.
I'm the owner of the idea, so you can get in contact with me, Ed Byrne. I'm on www.